Yesterday, some ambitious soldiers attempted to topple the democratically elected government in Guinea-Bissau. Although the attempted coup d'etat was successfully repelled by the country's security forces, it again brought to the fore the wave of coups that have hit Africa's Sahel region in recent months. In 18 months, coups have been recorded in Mali, Chad, Sudan, Burkina Faso, where soldiers have taken matters into their hands and toppled elected governments. Militaries in the region have seized upon popular discontent with corrupt and ineffective governance to justify their actions. In Burkina Faso and Mali, their actions have been welcomed with joy from some parts of the population. As events in Guinea-Bissau unfolded, the regional political and economic bloc, ECOWAS, as well as the United States, issued condemnations. The one thing these coups are making clear is that there is very little international bodies can issue in the way of deterrents. Joining us now from Abuja to discuss the rising wave of coups in Africa and the lessons that can be learned from them is Ambassador Joe Keshi. Ambassador Keshi is a retired Nigerian career diplomat who served in many countries around the world, including the United States, Togo, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone, where he participated as a facilitator in the negotiations that ended the 10-year civil war in that country. Good morning, Ambassador Keshi, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Dr. Abati, and thanks for having me, and Happy New Year, by the way.
Yeah, same to you, sir. Yeah, good to have you on the program. Well, quickly, we're trying to unravel this, well, is it a puzzle, I should say, of the return to militarization in parts of West Africa, the Sahel region, I said in the introduction, and this fear that this may become a trend even beyond that particular region. Why are we losing it with regard to democracy in some of these countries?
Let me also say good morning to Tundu.
Good morning, sir.
In direct answer to your question, I think it should be clear to us all now, or it should actually concern us all now, at this wave of coups. And I believe that ECOWAS and international bodies should go beyond condemnation and begin to look at why exactly the military becoming so ambitious, as you describe it, and I want to take over power as we witnessed in the 60s. We have not finished dealing with Burkina Faso, and here we are with uprising in Guinea-Bissau, which has experienced many coups. But certainly, as you also said in your intro, when you look at the popular support or the demonstration or the people jumping up to the streets, it gives you a clear understanding that the people are not happy with their governments, and that the issues of underdevelopment, poverty, and corruption in almost all these countries, are the triggers that encourage the military. But we also have to look at each country in a different way. Guinea-Bissau is a different, ball game, and it should come as no surprise that this is happening. They've actually done this so many times, and a number of countries have been helping that country to survive. I think one way or the other, leaders in this continent need to really sit down and think about all this. The major problem is that people are dissatisfied with what is going on in their respective countries, and that creates the trigger, that creates the anger, that creates the encouragement to the military that, look, this is a time we can do this and probably give the impression that we can solve the problem. But let's be very clear. The military has never solved any problem. In fact, they've compounded the problems. In a country like this, we can actually trace back the bulk of our problems to the military era. And so one way or the other, leaders must sit down and begin to think very seriously about the whole thing.
Right. Thank you for that, sir. What do you make of ECOWAS and AU as regional powers and their evident inability to stop this emerging trend, with regards to Mali, where the military have said they're not ready to hold elections and they want to stay in power for the next few years, ECOWAS slammed sanctions on Mali, which triggered protests in Mali in support of the military, dictators that have wrestled power from a democratically elected president. I'm laughing because it seems completely ridiculous. What is ECOWAS doing wrong in its approach, and the AU?
Tundu, you have to realize that to some extent, they are actually almost powerless. You have to realize to a large extent, they are almost powerless. All they can do is to rally around international organization to put pressure on the military, boys, to behave themselves. But the truth of the matter is that these boys believe that they have a popular support at home. Again, we can also question that to some extent, but there's nothing much ECOWAS or the AU can do, particularly if neighboring countries who are expected, to be in the forefront of implementing the sanctions, fail to act. It also goes further if the international community just issues statements and refuse to back up ECOWAS demand and the AU demand that sanctions should be imposed on these countries. There's very little they can do beyond what they are doing now, condemning it and doing the best they can to stop this wave of coup. Because look, we might be witnessing a domino effect here, and I pray that it's not so. But the truth of the matter is that there's very little they can do beyond what they are doing now. And we should actually sympathize with both ECOWAS and AU. They need strong international support, not just condemnation. The international support should also go ahead and support some of the sanctions they have imposed, And if they do that, perhaps this might put some stop to the madness we are witnessing now in the continent.
Well, there was some hope around 2003 when the AU came up with the African peer review mechanism to do peer-to-peer review under the auspices of NEPAD, both continental and subnational, national level structures. Now, what happened to this peer-to-peer review mechanism, the APRM process, that is supposed to focus on governance issues in some of these countries and hold African heads of state to their governance commitments?
I think two things happened. One, the leaders who were promoting that left office. The new generation of leaders did not show much interest in any peer review mechanism. Look, there was a time that ECOWAS, one can say this, ECOWAS actually tried its best to put in the ECOWAS, protocol about tenure elongation. They wanted it that every president should commit to staying in office as per the Constitution, and that nobody should change the Constitution to say more than, the required term. A number of ECOWAS leaders on the West Coast refused to endorse that. They opposed it, beginning with Togo, Ivory Coast, simply because the leaders wanted to stay longer. And this is a part of what, things that are creating the problems we are seeing now. And regrettably, I have to say this, I do not see any strong leader in the continent that can take us back to that period when African leaders will agree to peer review themselves, and take decisions that will help them to change a number of things in their respective countries. I think we've passed, that was the days gone, but we must continue to find a way to look, for me, the whole issue is all about leadership and what the leaders in power try or decide to do. So the discontent you are seeing, it's not only in these countries that are taking, look, anywhere the coup happens today, in any African countries, you will see people jump to the streets, rejoicing and celebrating. And that should tell us that the people are not happy. And one way or the other, we must find a way to solve the problem of leadership in the continent and make this continent more productive, create employment, create opportunities for You know, when you do that, it will probably stop the wave of discontent and keep the military in the barracks.
I want to talk about the disenchantment of Africa's youth population with the powers that be, especially when you look at Assimi Goïta. He's only 39 years old. And it just reminds us that not all African youths are prepared to die trying to cross, you know, the channel to England or go to Europe or what have you. Some of them, if they're not given a seat at the table, they will take it. Can we talk about just the lack of inclusivity in what we call a democracy, which is supposed to be for the people, all the people, and the fact that African youths, Nigerian youths specifically, I have to stress, have this nihilistic approach to life, having been so abused, so underserved, and so betrayed?
Tundu, that's really very, very strong, and I think that you've portrayed the situation. But for me, I think we need to try to continue to guide the youths of this country. Quite a number of Nigerian youths are doing very well. Look, they are doing great things. What we just need to do is to continue to create the opportunities, particularly number one, at the educational sector. Second thing is to ensure that the tools of development today are in their hands. And if you deprive them of this, if you do not create the opportunities, look, in this country, for example, and I say this all the time, states, how many states are creating employment or are creating jobs for the people? The federal government makes so much promises about job creation and everything. What is the result of all these promises? You know, when you put, look, when we, many years ago, when we got out of school, the situation was not like this. It was easy to find jobs because that generation of leaders created jobs. Regrettably, over the years, all the industries and the things they've done have been destroyed. We now have to go back to make this country productive and begin to create opportunities, you know, that would create employment for youth. There's nothing more upsetting or more discouraging. You leave school for so many years, you are unemployed, you have no jobs. At 27 or 28 or 30 years, you are still living with your parents. I mean, so what you describe is true, but we shouldn't give up, and we should begin to talk to the youth themselves. There are those who are taking the little opportunities in this country to do so many things. And that is where I think that we need to begin to direct their attention. As for taking care, as for helping themselves to power, I think you described somebody. Look, the thing is, all those who took power in the 60s were in their 30s and 40s. The last, I mean, I remember those in Sierra Leone very well. They were in their 20s, and I think the president was 27 or 29, Strasser, when they took over. But look at all the problems they created at the end of the day. And why did they create those problems? Because they lacked the requisite experience to govern the country. And we must bear this in mind. Everybody needs some requisite experience to be able to move on in life. And that's the honest truth. So whatever the youths want to do, let them also know that they require the experience, the knowledge of what they want to do. That will help greatly.
Well, Ambassador Keshi, is there something to be said about the role of France in some of the coups that we have seen in the Francophone, West African countries? Because, people push that theory that a reduction in terms of development aid and France also withdrawing from involvement, and some of those countries, their leaders are trying to differentiate themselves. I'm borrowing that phrase from a piece written last Sunday in This Day, on Sunday, by Professor Bola Akinterewa.
Dr. Abatsi, I don't fall into conspiracy theories. So you never find me engaged in that. The reality is this: the French have been helping all these countries for so many years. Is it not time that these countries grew up, for goodness sake? How long are we going to remain? 60 years after independence, if you count it, that Many of these countries gained their independence from the 60s. 60 years, 70 years, we are still depending on aid. There are countries outside this continent. They have no mineral resources at all. But they've developed. They are living on their own. Nobody is influencing those countries. Why is it that when it comes to Africa, we blame all our problems? If we do not blame the international community, we blame the French, particularly when it comes to West Africa. 60 years after independence, as far as I'm concerned, it's time enough for Francophone Africa to grow on its own and leave the French out of their problems. No, France has its own problems. If it can no longer provide or make provisions for what it used to do for a number of African countries, 60 years after independence, for goodness sake, it's enough for us in this continent to grow up. And I keep making this point. We need to go back and find a way to develop ourselves. We need to become more productive. We need to do what others have to do. We need to pay attention to, to education. We need to train our people in all aspects of development. When we do this, we probably begin to grow. Look, I'm not sure. I think Singapore or one other country, I'm not sure they have anything. They don't even have land. And today, they are one of the most developed countries in the world. So why do we sit down here and say, oh, they've stopped giving us aid. We are not receiving aid. We want to, come on, let's stop all this. It is time, and anybody who wants to govern any of these countries must come out with a blueprint of how to develop the country. Not just, look, I don't have confidence in the military boys that are taking their office. They are not going to do better than the leaders they've removed. And some of them complain that they took over power because they are not being given arms and ammunition to fight like in places like Mali and Burkina Faso and the rest. Will they themselves be able to produce arms and ammunition for the military boys they are sending to the war front? No. The answer is no. So let's be very frank about this. We in this region, in the continent of Africa, we need to reset the button and begin to do what others have done in the years gone by, become developed countries. Just take a look at what others have done and do the same thing. It might take a longer time. It might require a lot of sacrifice. But look, there's no way you can develop or build up a nation, your nation, without paying some price or without some sacrifice. And that's my view on all this, friend that. I don't often buy these conspiracies. I want to face the reality that underdevelopment is the cause of some of these crises, and the underdevelopment is as a result of the failure of leaders over the years to do the needful.
Thank you very much, sir. Underdevelopment and complacency. The fact that these democracies were so hard won, they must be guarded with everything that we have. So I'd like your take on those safeguards that are absolutely crucial to maintain democracy that people actually literally died for. I'm going to start with the electoral process. I'd like you to address the issue that's currently happening with the Electoral Amendment Act. President Muhammadu Buhari declined his assent based on one clause regarding internal democracy in our political parties. One clause might seem like a tiny thing, but how does it actually affect the entire democratic process, which is what we're all, I imagine, trying to maintain here?
Well, look, let's not put the whole blame on the president.
No, not at all.
It went back to the House. What did the House do? They just, played the game they do very well, modified it to comply with what the parties or the president wants. Again, it shows you part of what I'm trying to say. When they were doing that modification, do they really care about the people, or do they really care about the survival of democracy? Absolutely no. It was just for, self-interest. And so, based on everybody is acting based on their self-interest. And when they continue to act based on their self-interest, again, these are the things that eventually lead to dissatisfaction and leads to coup. In this country, the political space has been seized by a group of people from 1999 till date. It is very, very difficult, or even very challenging, for new entrants who want to go in and contest for office. You really have to, be extra, extra courageous to really want to go in, except you have the blessings of the godfathers or those who control the political process. And that is not democracy itself. It should be open. It should be open, transparent, for anybody who wants to go in and try his best, in any way they like. But for me, it's all about self-interest. That's what you are witnessing today if they have the courage of their conviction and are very serious, all they needed to do was, and they believed in what they've done. And this is very important. And they believed in what they've done. All they needed to do was override the president. And that's all.
Well, Ambassador, I think we all agree on one point, that return to military rule is a return to the past in Africa, in West Africa also, and that is not something to be encouraged, and that every step must be taken to protect democracy in our various countries. But I wanted to ask you, sanctions look like they don't seem to help in Africa, particularly in the light of these coups. But sanctions do work elsewhere. In Afghanistan, the U.S. and the allies imposing sanctions on Afghanistan has taken that country to the brink of economic collapse. Now, beyond sanctions, what are those steps that ECOWAS and the African Union should be taking in terms of conflict management within the continent, so that we can better protect this democracy that everyone fought for?
Look, again, I make the point. I'm not too sure that the comparison with Afghanistan is right. Afghanistan is a different ballgame because the powers, the global powers that really drive the process, were determined that until, they get what I call their pound of flesh, Afghanistan, they are not going to give anything to Afghanistan for now. It's a different thing from what we're experiencing here, on the West Coast. Look, I think that as of today, ECOWAS and AU, the only options they have, look, they cannot raise a force today to go into Mali or to Guinea-Bissau or to Burkina Faso. ECOWAS can't raise a force. The only country that can do that and push that is not in any shape to do that today, and that's Nigeria. So for me, until they get that international support, and they have to do a lot of diplomatic work to get that international support to put sanctions, to ensure that they expand the sanctions. If that happens, I think the military leaders in these countries will come to their senses. But as long as it's just only ECOWAS, sanctions, I'm not too sure that will work the way we want it to work. Certainly, it will not work. But the good thing is that these countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, they are still engaged with ECOWAS, which also indicates that it might not be working 100%, but they are also concerned. The military leaders today are concerned that, look, if this continues the way ECOWAS is going, we might even be in some trouble. So I just think that we need to continue to encourage ECOWAS and AU to continue to engage, the military in these countries, and to seek international support if we want the sanctions to work. Beyond that, we also need to talk to the politicians. Look, we need to go back and ensure that the politicians themselves behave. It is a failure of the politicians, the failure of the leaders. And some of the things that the leaders do that anger the people, that anger the military, that virtually leaves everybody frustrated with what's happening in their respective countries. We need to find a way to reach out to the politicians to have some conscience in the things they are doing. Look, if yesterday you were practically nobody, and one day you return to your village after being in the house for just 3, 4, 5 months, They return with a convoy of cars. How do you expect the youths in that village to behave? They now believe that, look, this man was a useless man a few days ago. We must also get into this politics and go and do the same thing that he has done to become who he is today. So there's a way. Look, we all need to begin to have a conversation. There's the issue of morality also involved in this argument apart from development. Our lifestyles encourages, our bad behavior one way or the other. So for me, ECOWAS needs to seek international support if they want the sanctions to work. There's no other way. Preaching to the leaders will not work because it has not worked in the past. As I said before, when ECOWAS did attempt to ensure that the constitutions of all the countries are not, changed in terms of tenure elongation, some countries vehemently opposed it. And they went ahead after that, of course, to extend their stay in power. And so when one country has extended its stay successful, another one is encouraged to do the same thing. So you just find few countries who are not interested in extending their constitution for the president to remain in office. So there's a lot we need to do, but certainly ECOWAS and AU, they need international support for them to be able to stop the waves of coup in Africa.
Yes, sir, you raise excellent points. Explaining does not mean justifying. We have to face the factors that cause this, but obviously there's no justification for coups. Which leads me to my question. If ECOWAS and the AU have been unable to successfully preach the gospel of decency to the leaders, who should be preaching to the public? Because somebody clearly has to. You referred earlier to the popular support that some of these coups are able to attract, which obviously is going to be momentary when they find out that these military dictators cannot solve their problems either. You made that point about how in Burkina Faso, there were problems with the rations. The soldiers, security agents were not given their food rations. They were poorly armed. They were attacked and 50 died. There was a public protest and the military came to the side of the people, or so it appeared, and the people were jubilating. Those same people are going to be desperately sorry for jubilating. Who can express this to the people, that the only way to change an administration is through the polls, that a coup is never an option, that this logic that these military men are your messiah, it's just not going to happen. In today's coup, that attempted coup in Guinea-Bissau, it's been linked to drug traffickers. How are drug traffickers ever going to come in, depose a democratically elected president and become the savior of the people? It's not going to happen. How can African people be, addressed on this issue? Who is supposed to drive that message across?
Tundu, I don't know whether you can see my hands up. I honestly... I don't know, Tunde, if you can see my hands up.
I can, sir.
I honestly wish I can. I honestly wish I can answer your question. Honestly, I wish I can answer your question. Even our religious leaders are not changing our mindsets, are not changing our behavior because they are as bad equal as well. So which politician, look, let's just take this country for a second. Take a look at the political class and tell me which politician you think can change anything in this country. Which politician today in this country, Nigeria, is influencing the youth or giving the youth hope that when he gets to power, that things will change? Who? Practically nobody. And it is the same all over this country. All over the continent. How many of these leaders look, we know how these leaders came to power. Let's not deceive ourselves. Some did not even campaign extensively. Some were not even the choice of the people to start with. But they were the choice of the godfathers. And they have become so entrenched, so much that look at the gentleman that was gladly displaying the fact that he's been in the house since he left school and has fathered 20-something children. His goal is to get to 30. Is that what leadership is all about? Of course, no. So the question, let me just reframe your question. to know who in this country is influencing the young ones. Yeah, you find a few, the people in the social media, the influencers, the musicians, Davido, Boy, Boma Boy, and the rest of them. And of course, a few people in the private sector are inspiring. Beyond that, at the political class, name one person that is really, truly, genuinely interested. Look, let me give you a typical example that I like to give. As a young man growing up in Ibadan, it was always joy to see people like Adelabu go around that country. When I remember when Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe made a trip to Ibadan, people were actually, surging forward with a lot of security, trying just to touch his white agbada. Today, I bet you that no Nigerian is going to do that to any political leader in this country. Not to talk of the adoration we have for Awolowo and the rest of them. Today in this country, I make a bet. Nobody will do that to any. In fact, they go around with siren and nobody cares. Nobody even looks up who they are. It just shows you the disconnect, the broken down relationship between the governments and those who are governing them. And until those who are governing them come back and connect to the people and do the needful, inspire the people, raise the people, bring out the people from their level of poverty and ensure development, fairness, justice, and equity. Come on. I don't see any of that happen. So my question to you, back to you, it's if you can name one leader that can really inspire people, really talk to anybody in this country or the youth, and they will listen and do exactly that. Yeah, you might find a few in the private sector, obviously because of what they are doing, and the story of their lives. But at the political space, it's very gloomy. It's very gloomy, and that's the reality for me.
Well, just one more question from me, and I'll rather allude to what you said earlier, that the only country in West Africa that can intervene, to stop this coup, emerging coup culture in West Africa, is not in a position to do so. And I guess you are referring to Nigeria. Once upon a time, this country used to provide leadership in managing conflict across West Africa, Liberia, Sierra Leone. In one other country, the Nigerian president went there and personally drove away the coup plotters in another country. What happened to us? What did we lose? Is it the moral right to provide that leadership or some other thing?
Dr. Abati, your own lips have answered your own question.
Not quite. You are the professional. You are the diplomat. I wanted you to break it down. What happened to Nigeria?
Well, look, you know this better than I do. You write about this all the time, and you guys do some very beautiful, commentary every morning, to take us to what's going on in this country. You know what's happening in the country. Unfortunately, the kind of drive, energy, power that we exhibited in the 70s and the 80s, with a relatively strong economy behind, it's no longer in place. Leadership has changed, and a number of things have really, brought us to where we are today. We still have some little cards we can play, but certainly not as strong as it used to be, But today, that said, Nigeria is still the strongest country within the ECOWAS region, even if we are not, punching as hard as we should be. But the truth remains that Nigeria has a role to play in all these things. And that can only be done if this country itself is strong enough, it's in a position to do some of these things. I watched the British Prime Minister speak yesterday, or rather, sorry, one of the ministers on Sky this morning, saying that, look, everybody thought that when the British left EU, that was over for them. But that over the last 2 years or so, they've become such, an engaging nation itself. They've become, better than they were when they were in EU, and that gave the Prime Minister the confidence, to travel to Ukraine to say all the things he said, he said yesterday. And that's exactly what we need to realize, that a number of countries still look up to us for leadership. They still look up to this country for leadership. And everybody knows that. And so we ourselves have to be in that position, create the opportunities for us to be able to lead and provide the leadership that not just West Africa needs, but Africa itself needs. You were right. There was a time in which anything happening in Africa, for any decision to be taken, either at the UN or in some capitals, Nigeria will be contacted, consulted rather. And so somewhere, I'm hoping that somewhere in the future, we'll be able to get back to, we're able to stand tall, strong enough to be able to provide that leadership that people are looking at. If we were strong, and if we had a very good, strong military, and our president says, or through the ECOWAS leadership, and says that, look, we are going to raise a standing force. And this is what we did, like we did in the Gambia, under President Buhari. I'm sure that, people will think twice. But again, I'll go back and say, we need to focus on the issues of underdevelopment. We need to focus on the issues of human capital development. And above all, we need to ensure that the political space is open. It's not hijacked and perpetually hijacked by some people, who alone believe that they were born to be in politics, they were born to rule, and they will determine who gets what and just don't care about the system itself. If they continue with this attitude, the system itself will collapse and collapse upon them. There's no way. I'm not doubtful about what I've just said. That if we refuse to develop, if we refuse to develop our human capital, if we refuse to open up the political space, we should all not be surprised when things like this happen. You should not all be surprised. Our population is growing. Look at the number of kids out of school. So anywhere you go in this country, you can actually raise an army yourself to do whatever you want to do. So this should concern our leaders, this should concern our politicians, and this should concern leaders all over this continent. And the last thing I want to say to you, Dr. Abasi and Tundu, for you to understand what I'm trying to say. Please, I wish you can go back and look at the tapes when the African Cup of Nations started. If you look at all the tapes of the first set of matches that were played, and some of the ones that came on later, and please compare the audience, compare the spectators rather, do a comparison of the spectators with the spectators you see in the English Premier League or in La Liga, and you see the level of content and you see the level of poverty in this country.
Well, on that note, we'd like to thank you very much, Ambassador Joe Keshi, for joining us on the morning show today. Thank you very much indeed.